Veshanak had welcomed 47 species into the galactic confluence during her 3 centuries of service. She knew what to expect when a new species applied for membership. They would arrive nervous and grateful, eager to learn from civilizations thousands of years older than their own. They would listen carefully to explanations of how the confluence worked, how it protected its members, how it made sure every citizen and every member species was cared for from birth until natural death. Humans were different from the first moment. The human delegation arrived on time. Precisely on time, which was already unusual. Most species arrived early, too excited to wait. The humans walked into the chamber wearing identical dark suits, carrying identical data tablets, and they smiled with perfect politeness that somehow felt rehearsed. Director Chun led the human group. She was a small woman with gray hair pulled back tight, and when she shook Veshanak's hand, Veshanak felt nothing. That was wrong. Veshanak's species, the emphatic collective, felt emotions from every being they touched. Joy, fear, hope, nervousness. Always something. But from Chun, there was only a kind of smooth professionalism, like touching polished metal. "Thank you for receiving us," Chun said. "We're honored to present Earth's application for Confluence membership." The presentation began normally enough. Chun showed images of Earth, a blue and green world that looked like 1,000 others. She described human history, their struggles, their achievements. Standard material. Then she moved to governmental structures, and Veshanak felt the mood in the chamber shift. "Our primary economic system is market-based capitalism," Chun explained, displaying charts and graphs. Resources are allocated through price mechanisms. Those who cannot afford necessary goods and services may access limited safety net programs, subject to eligibility requirements and funding availability. Counselor Thress of the nurturing swarms raised a crystalline appendage. "I don't understand. What happens to those who cannot afford food?" "There are charitable organizations," Chun said, "and government assistance programs for qualifying individuals. However, approximately 11% of our population experiences food insecurity at some point each year." The chamber went silent. Thress's 1,000-part body rippled with distress. "You have enough food, but you allow people to starve?" "We produce sufficient calories globally," Chun agreed. "But distribution systems require economic viability. Transporting food to areas where people cannot pay for it creates market inefficiencies." Veshanak watched the other counselors react with growing horror. Commander Aros of the honor-bound Krell stood from his seat, his scales flushing dark red. "This is barbaric." Chun didn't flinch. "It's systematic. Everyone understands the rules. If you work and earn money, you can purchase food. If you cannot work, there are programs, though they're limited. The system provides incentive for productivity while maintaining a baseline safety net. It's stable and has functioned for centuries. But individuals suffer," Veshanak said quietly. "Yes," Chun said simply. "Some do, but the system as a whole functions efficiently. Alternative approaches we've tried led to economic collapse, which caused greater suffering. This way, the majority prosper and the system remains stable." The presentation continued, and each new revelation made things worse. Chun described their healthcare system, where insurance companies could deny coverage based on profitability calculations. She explained their education system, where schools in poor areas received less funding because local property taxes were lower. She detailed their justice system, where 95% of criminal cases never went to trial because defendants accepted plea bargains rather than risk harsher sentences. "Doesn't this mean innocent people plead guilty to crimes they didn't commit?" asked historian Catel of the Memory Keepers. "Statistically, yes," Chun said. "Perhaps 3 to 5% of those who plead guilty are actually innocent. But trials are expensive and time-consuming. The plea bargain system allows us to process millions of cases efficiently. Without it, the courts would collapse. Veshenak felt sick. Her species had seen many things in their long history, but this cold calculation of acceptable suffering was new. The confluence was built on the principle that every individual mattered, that systems should serve people, not the other way around. "Perhaps we should discuss your military capabilities," Veshenak suggested, hoping to move to more familiar ground. Chun nodded and pulled up new files. "Our military operates on combined arms doctrine with network-centric warfare capabilities. We maintain standing forces of approximately 20 million across air, land, sea, space, and cyber domains." "And your rules of engagement?" Commander Arias asked. His species were warriors, but they fought with honor codes that protected the innocent. "We use proportionality analysis," Chun said. "Collateral damage is acceptable if military necessity justifies it, and civilian casualties are not excessive relative to the military advantage gained." The chamber erupted. Multiple counselors spoke at once, their voices overlapping in shock and anger. Chun waited patiently for silence, then continued. "I understand this is difficult to hear, but let me show you the alternative." She displayed historical data from the Krulsothian War, a 3-century conflict where both sides refused to accept any civilian casualties. 300 years. Trillions dead. Both species nearly extinct. Because neither side would make the hard choice. She pulled up human data. "Our longest war lasted 6 years. Terrible casualties. Millions dead. But we calculated what was necessary, executed the plan, and ended the conflict. More people died per year, but the total dead was 98% lower because we didn't prolong the suffering." Veshenak reached out with her empathic sense, trying to understand Chun's feelings as she discussed millions of deaths. She expected trauma, guilt, buried pain. Instead, she felt that same smooth professionalism and something else. Pride. Satisfaction in work well done. "You're proud of this," Veshenak whispered. "I'm proud that we face reality," Chun said. "We don't hide from hard choices. We build systems that work even when the people running them are flawed, tired, or scared. Our systems aren't perfect, but they function. They scale. They survive." The session ended early. The council needed time to process what they'd learned. As the chamber emptied, Veshenak found herself standing alone with Chun. "You horrify us," Veshenak said softly. "I know," Chun replied. "We horrify ourselves sometimes. But horror doesn't feed people. Good intentions don't cure diseases. Love doesn't stop wars. Systems do. Cold, efficient, mathematical systems that work whether we feel good about them or not." Veshenak had no response to that. She watched Chun gather her materials and walk away, footsteps echoing in the empty chamber, and wondered if the confluence was ready to welcome a species that had turned cruelty into mathematics and called it progress. The council met in emergency session 3 days later. Representatives from all major confluent species filled the chamber, and the air hummed with agitated conversation. Veshenak could feel waves of emotion from everyone present. Confusion, fear, disgust, and from a few of the older species, something that felt like grim recognition. "We must reject their application," Councillor Thrust declared. "A species that treats its own people as numbers in a calculation cannot be trusted with membership in the confluence." Commander Urier stood, his warriors' bearing somehow diminished. "I have fought in 7 wars. I have killed enemies with my own hands. But I have never calculated how many of my own people I was willing to sacrifice before beginning a battle. These humans are not warriors. They are something colder." Historian Catel raised his hand for recognition. His species carried genetic memory of all their ancestors, and he looked older than his years. Before we vote, I request permission to present additional research. My team has been examining human historical records. I believe the Council needs more context before making this decision. Veshenak granted permission. Though she couldn't imagine what context could make humanity's systems seem less monstrous, Keitel activated the chamber's display systems. What Director Chun showed us represents humanity's current systems. But these systems did not emerge from nothing. They are the result of thousands of years of iteration, of humans trying different approaches and learning from failure. He showed them images from human history. Veshenak had seen many terrible things in her long life, but what Keitel revealed made her wish her species could turn off their empathic senses. This is chattel slavery, Keitel said quietly. For centuries, humans enslaved other humans based on skin color. They treated people as property. They bred them like animals, separating families to optimize physical characteristics for labor. They built entire economic systems on this foundation. And they maintained detailed records, keeping accounts of human beings like they were livestock. The chamber filled with horrified silence. Keitel continued, his voice steady but strained. This is the Holocaust. An industrial system designed to murder millions of people. They built factories for killing. They optimized the process. They kept records of how many people they could kill per day, how much poison gas was cost-effective, how to dispose of bodies efficiently. They turned genocide into a bureaucratic process with forms, schedules, and productivity targets. Thres's body fragmented in distress, thousands of individual parts scattering before reforming. Stop, please. We understand. They are monsters. No, Keitel said firmly. That's what you must understand. They were monsters. Past tense. Let me show you what happened next. New images appeared. Documents, laws, photographs of protests and celebrations. These are the systems humans built to dismantle slavery. Constitutional amendments. Civil rights legislation. Enforcement mechanisms. They didn't just decide slavery was wrong. They built legal frameworks to prevent it. They created bureaucracies to enforce equality. They systematized justice. He showed more records. After the Holocaust, they created international laws about genocide. They established courts. They built early warning systems. They didn't rely on hoping people would be good. They built systems that would work even when people weren't good. Veshenak watched images of human progress scroll past. Laws protecting workers. Safety regulations written in blood after disasters. Environmental protections created after poisoning their own air and water. Medical ethics boards formed after horrific experiments. Every cruel system they showed us, Keitel said, is the result of humans learning from even crueler systems they abandoned. They had slavery, so they built civil rights laws. They had factory deaths, so they created safety regulations. They had famines in the midst of plenty, so they built food assistance programs. Commander Arios leaned forward. But these programs are still inadequate. They still let people starve. Yes, Keitel agreed. Because they learned something else too. They learned that good intentions alone lead to disaster. They tried communist systems that promised to care for everyone, and those systems collapsed, causing mass starvation. They tried pure charity systems that relied on individual virtue, and those failed when virtue wasn't enough. They displayed more data, economic charts spanning centuries. So they built systems that balance efficiency with compassion. Systems that provide incentives while maintaining safety nets. Systems that acknowledge human selfishness, but try to channel it toward productive ends. They're not perfect. They're not even good by our standards. But they're better than anything else humans have tried. The chamber absorbed this in troubled silence. Finally, an elder representative from the Crystalline Architect spoke. Our species spent centuries crafting perfect living spaces for each citizen. So they are learning, she said slowly. But they are still so young. Perhaps with guidance, with exposure to our ways, they could learn to build systems that truly care for everyone. I thought the same, Keitel admitted. So I asked Director Chun directly. I asked why they don't simply adopt Confluence standards. Why not guarantee food, shelter, and healthcare to everyone as we do? What did she say? Vashanak asked. Keitel looked troubled. She said they would need to see our economic models in detail. She asked about our population growth rates, our resource allocation systems, our productivity metrics. Then she said something that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. He pulled up a quote on the screen in Chun's precise handwriting. Your systems work beautifully for your species, but you have stable populations. You live for centuries. You have abundant resources. Humans breed fast, die young, and spent most of our history one harvest away from starvation. We built our systems for scarcity, not abundance. For short-term survival, not long-term optimization. Maybe someday we'll have the luxury of your approach. Right now, we have to focus on what keeps 8 billion people alive tomorrow. Vashanak felt a chill run through her. She thinks our systems wouldn't work for them. She thinks our systems are luxuries they can't afford, Keitel corrected. And when I ran the numbers, accounting for human biology, reproduction rates, and resource constraints, I think she might be right. A system that guaranteed everything to everyone on Earth might collapse under its own weight. Then they should reduce their population, Thresh suggested. They're trying, Keitel said. Birth rates are falling in developed nations. But that's another system they built. Education for women. Access to contraception. Economic incentives for smaller families. They systematize population control too, and it's working. But it takes generations. Commander Araya shook his head slowly. So they're trapped. Too many people, too few resources, too short-lived to build slowly. So they build systems that sacrifice some to save most. And they accept the mathematics of suffering because the alternative is worse. That's the terrifying part, Keitel said quietly. They're not evil. They're not cruel for cruelty's sake. They're desperate. They've been desperate for their entire history. And in that desperation, they learn to build systems that function without compassion. Because compassion alone wasn't enough to keep their billions alive. Vashanak understood then why Chun had felt like polished metal when they touched. It wasn't coldness. It was armor. Protection against the weight of making choices that sacrifice people to mathematics day after day, year after year. Knowing each number represented someone who would suffer, but accepting it anyway because the system demanded it. The question before us, Vashanak said slowly, is not whether humans are good or evil. It's whether the confluence can accept a species that has learned to function without relying on individual virtue. A species that has systematized both cruelty and mercy, and doesn't see a contradiction there. Before anyone could respond, an alarm sounded throughout the chamber. Every counselor's personal communicator activated simultaneously. On the main screen, emergency text scrolled in red. Alert. Harvester swarm detected. Trajectory toward Confluence core worlds. Estimated arrival. 42 days. Evacuation. Protocols activated. The mathematical species that humanity had become was about to face a problem that required exactly the kind of cold calculation they specialized in. The harvesters had no name for themselves because they had no sense of self. They were a distributed intelligence spread across millions of biological ships, consuming everything organic in their path and moving on. In 10,000 years of recorded history, no species had ever stopped them. The only survival strategy was to run. The Confluence's evacuation fleet launched within hours. Thousands of ships, from massive colony transports to small family vessels, began the largest humanitarian operation in galactic history. Every confluent species contributed what they could. The nurturing swarms provided care for children and elderly. The crystalline architects designed temporary shelters. The emphatic collective offered counseling services to help people cope with leaving their homes. It was beautiful, organized chaos. In the command center, Veshenak watched the logistics displays with weary pride. They would save so many people. Not everyone. There were colonies too distant to reach in time, settlements too remote to evacuate. The projections said they could save 90% of the population in the Harvester's path. 10% would be left behind. Approximately 12 billion individuals across hundreds of worlds. She tried not to think about the numbers. Tried to focus on the 90% they would save. But the weight of 12 billion lives pressed down on her anyway. Counselor Veshenak, a junior assistant, approached nervously. The human delegation requests an emergency audience. They say they have a proposal. Veshenak felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. Of course they did. Director Chun arrived with a different human this time. A severe-looking man introduced as military coordinator Jang. They set up their presentation without preamble. And Veshenak noticed neither of them looked tired despite the crisis. They looked focused, almost energized. This was what humans did, she realized. They functioned in crisis. We've analyzed the Harvester Swarm's movement patterns, Jang began, displaying tactical maps. They respond to biological signatures. They move toward higher concentrations of organic matter. This behavior is consistent across all recorded encounters. We know this, Commander Arios said impatiently. That's why we're evacuating. We're removing the biological signatures they track. Exactly, Jang said. But you're missing an opportunity. They don't choose targets randomly. They follow the strongest signals. Which means their path can be predicted. Which means their path can be manipulated. He zoomed in on a section of space. 3 worlds glowed red. If we maintain population centers on these 3 planets while evacuating everywhere else, the Harvesters will concentrate their swarm to reach these targets. They'll move through this gravity well. A blue line appeared on the map, where we can position sufficient firepower to destroy them. The chamber went silent. Veshenak felt sick understanding wash over her. How many people live on those 3 worlds? She asked quietly. 22 million currently, Chun said. We can evacuate non-essential personnel and concentrate defenses, reducing that to approximately 20 million. Hardened shelters should allow survival rates of 60 to 70%. Total projected casualties, 6 to 8 million. You want to use them as bait, Thress said, her body rippling with distress. We want to save 12 billion people, Jang corrected. Your evacuation plan saves 90%. Our plan saves 99.7%. The mathematics are clear. Commander Arias stood, scales flushed dark with anger. You would sacrifice millions knowingly, deliberately. We don't do that. We save who we can save, but we don't choose who dies. You're choosing right now, Chun said calmly. You chose when you decided evacuation was the only option. You chose 12 billion deaths over finding another way. You just chose passively instead of actively. That's not the same, Veshenak protested. Isn't it? Chun asked. Someone will die either way. You prefer that it's random, decided by distance and logistics. We prefer it's chosen deliberately, minimizing total casualties. Both are choices. You just feel better about yours. Historian Catel spoke up. Even if we accepted your logic, which I don't, how do you know this will work? The Harvesters have never been destroyed before. Jang pulled up more data. Because no one has ever tried to fight them systematically. Every species has responded emotionally with panic and evacuation. We're proposing a calculated response based on behavioral analysis and strategic positioning. We've modeled this extensively. 78% probability of success. And the other 22%? Asked the crystalline architect elder. If we fail, everyone dies, Jiang said simply. The harvesters continue through confluent space unimpeded. Your evacuation becomes permanent exodus. But if we succeed, we save 12 billion lives at the cost of 6 to 8 million. The council erupted in argument. Some species called the plan monstrous. Others pointed out that the humans were offering to save billions. The nurturing swarms refused to even consider using civilians as bait. The honor-bound Krell said they would rather die with honor than live with such calculations. Veshnak called for order and a vote. It was one of the hardest things she'd ever done. The result was decisive. 847 species voted no. One species voted yes. The humans accepted the decision without argument. We understand, Chun said. We'll contribute our ships to your evacuation effort. We wish you success. They left quietly, and Veshnak felt a strange mixture of relief and regret. They had maintained their principles. They had refused to turn people into numbers. But somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that 12 billion was also a number dot over the next week. As evacuation continued, something unexpected happened. Individual planets began contacting the human delegation directly. First one, then another, then dozens. These worlds were on the projected path of the harvesters. They would be consumed first, and they knew it. The colony world of Thesa was among them. Population 15 million. Too far from evacuation routes to save more than 20%. The governor contacted Jiang directly and agreed to his plan. Then Verdant Home, an agricultural world of 8 million, did the same. Then Keeper's Watch, a research station with 3 million souls. The Confluence Council tried to forbid it, but member worlds had sovereignty over their own defense. One by one, the colonies closest to the harvester path made their own choice. Use us, they said. Let our risks save the others. By the end of the first week, humans had agreements with enough colonies to implement Jiang's plan. The 3 bait worlds were chosen not for strategic value, but because they volunteered. Because their people chose to stand in the path of the harvesters. If it meant saving billions. Chun contacted Veshnak one last time before beginning. We need you to know something. These people chose this. We didn't force them. They looked at the mathematics and made the same choice we would make. Because you showed them the numbers, Veshnak said bitterly. You turned them into people like you. No, Chun said softly. We showed them the truth. That sometimes the universe forces terrible choices. That sometimes the most compassionate thing to do is accept the mathematics. They were always capable of this choice. They just needed someone to present it clearly. The human ships moved into position. The 3 bait worlds fortified their defenses. And the Confluence watched in horror and hope as humanity, prepared to do what no species had done before, turn compassion into mathematics, lives into numbers, and 12 billion saved into 6 million lost. Veshnak prayed to God she didn't believe in that the humans were right, that their cold calculations would work. Because if they didn't, if the harvesters weren't stopped, the numbers would become incalculable. The waiting began. 30 days until the harvesters arrived. 30 days to live with the weight of a choice that honored individual sovereignty while treating individuals as numbers. 30 days to discover if humanity's way of thinking could save them all or doom them all. And in that waiting, Veshnak realized something that terrified her more than the harvesters themselves. She was starting to think like a human. She was starting to see the mathematics. She was starting to accept that sometimes systems mattered more than souls. because systems could save souls that compassion alone could not reach. The transformation had already begun. The harvesters arrived exactly when the humans predicted. The swarm emerged from deep space like a living darkness, millions of organic ships moving with perfect coordination. They had no strategy because they needed none. For 10,000 years, they had simply consumed and moved on. Veshenak watched from the command center as the first contact began. The three bait worlds glowed on the tactical display, their remaining populations huddled in fortified shelters deep underground. 20 million people serving as bait for a trap that might not work. The harvesters moved toward the biological signatures as predicted, their swarm flowing through space like water seeking the lowest point. Zhang's plan was working. The massive gravity well drew them in, concentrating the swarm into a smaller area. Human ships waited in perfect formation, weapons charged, positioned at calculated points around the gravity well. Ships from other confluent species had joined them, ones whose worlds had volunteered for the plan. They all waited with the cold patience of people who understood mathematics. Commander Arya stood beside Veshenak, watching the display. His species had refused to participate, calling it dishonorable. But he couldn't look away. "They're really going to do it," he said quietly. "They're using those people as bait." "Those people chose to be used," Veshenak reminded him. "They volunteered, because the humans convinced them it was logical, necessary." Veshenak didn't answer. She wasn't sure anymore which side was right. She only knew that billions of lives hung on whether the humans understood the universe better than the species who valued every soul. The harvesters reached the gravity well. Their swarm compressed, drawn together by the massive gravitational forces. Zhang had calculated that this moment would come, that the harvesters would be most vulnerable when their distributed intelligence was forced into a concentrated space. "All ships," Zhang's voice came through the command channel, calm and professional. "Fire on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark." Space lit up with weapons fire. Energy beams, kinetic projectiles, plasma torpedoes. Every weapon system the Confluence possessed unleashed at once. The harvesters tried to scatter, but the gravity well held them. Their organic ships began to die by the thousands, then millions. But it wasn't enough. The swarm was too large. They were dying, but they were still moving forward, still reaching for the bait worlds. The human calculations had underestimated the swarm size, or overestimated their weapons' effectiveness. "They're going to break through," someone whispered in the command center. Veshenak watched the display with growing horror. The plan was failing. The harvesters would reach the bait worlds, consume them, and keep moving. 20 million dead for nothing, and the evacuation fleet would never save everyone in time. Then something unexpected happened. Ships from the honor-bound Krell began moving. Despite their species' official refusal to participate, individual Krell warriors were breaking formation and joining the human fleet. They weren't following orders. They were following their hearts, choosing to fight rather than watch. "Arios, what are your people doing?" Veshenak demanded. The commander stared at the display, scales flickering between colors. "They're choosing honor over doctrine. Your humans showed them something. That honor isn't about following codes blindly. Sometimes honor means making the terrible choice because no one else will." More ships joined, nurturing swarm vessels that should have been evacuating civilians. Crystalline architect ships that had never fired weapons before. One by one, species that had voted against the plan chose to support it anyway. The combined firepower turned the tide. The harvester swarm began to collapse, their coordination breaking down as their numbers fell below critical mass. Within hours, the last harvester ship was destroyed. The three bait worlds survived. Casualties were high. nearly 8 million dead from the bombardment and the brief harvester contact before they were stopped. But the shelters had worked. 12 million survived. And beyond them, 12 billion people who would have been lost were saved. The aftermath was quiet. The command center emptied slowly as species began returning to their worlds, to the massive task of rebuilding after the evacuation. Veshenak sat alone, looking at the casualty reports. 8 million names. 8 million individuals whose deaths had been calculated, accepted, built into the system. Director Chun found her there hours later. "You're thinking about the dead," Chun said. It wasn't a question. "I'm trying to feel appropriate grief," Veshenak admitted. "But I keep thinking about the 12 billion we saved. I keep running the numbers. Keep seeing the mathematics. What have you done to me?" "Nothing you weren't already capable of," Chun said gently. She sat beside Veshenak, and for the first time, when they touched, Veshenak felt real emotion from her. Sadness, weariness, the weight of all those numbers. "You do feel it," Veshenak said in surprise. "The cost, the pain. You're not actually cold." "We can't afford to be cold," Chun said. "If we didn't feel the weight of these choices, we'd be monsters. We feel every loss. We mourn every number. But we can't let that stop us from making the choices that need to be made. How do you live with it?" "We don't, not easily." Chun looked at the casualty reports. "Every human leader who has ever sent people to die carries that weight forever. Every doctor who has to decide which patient gets the last transplant organ. Every judge who sentences someone based on statistics rather than individual circumstances. We all carry it." She pulled up a quote on her tablet. "One of our philosophers said something once. The problem with fighting for human freedom is that one spends most of one's time defending scoundrels. For it is against scoundrels that oppressive laws are first aimed. And oppression must be stopped at the beginning if it is to be stopped at all." "I don't understand," Veshenak said. "Systems that seem cruel often protect freedoms we take for granted. Markets that let people starve also let people innovate without permission. Justice systems with plea bargains process millions fairly even if individuals suffer. Military forces that calculate casualties can end wars faster. The cruelty is real, but it serves a purpose beyond itself. And if there was a better way, then we take it," Chun said immediately. "We're not attached to suffering. We just haven't found systems that work better. If you can show us how to feed everyone without markets, how to process justice without compromise, how to win wars without casualties, we'll adopt it tomorrow. We're not married to our systems. We're married to finding what works." The Confluence Council met one final time to vote on humanity's membership application. Veshenak had expected passionate debate, but instead found quiet acceptance. The harvesters had changed something fundamental. "I don't like their systems," Counselor Thress said. "I find them cruel and inefficient compared to our own. But they were willing to implement them when we weren't. They saved billions of our people using methods we found unconscionable. I don't think we can reject them for being willing to do what we couldn't." Commander Arayo spoke next. "My warriors disobeyed orders to join their battle. When I asked them why, they said the humans showed them that true honor isn't about keeping your hands clean. It's about being willing to get them dirty when the alternative is worse. I thought my people understood honor. The humans taught us we've been confusing honor with comfort. The vote was unanimous. Humanity was welcomed into the confluence, not as students who would learn better ways, but as equals who understood something the others didn't." After the ceremony, Veshenak walked with Chun to the gardens outside the council chambers. They moved in comfortable silence for a while. "What will you do now?" Veshenak asked. "Now that you're members?" "Keep building systems," Chun said. "Better ones, hopefully. We'll learn from you, adapt what works, and maybe teach you some things too. That's what systems are for. To learn, adapt, improve. Will you ever build systems that don't require sacrifice? Chun smiled sadly. When we live in a universe that doesn't require sacrifice, yes. Until then, we'll build the best systems we can. Systems that minimize suffering, even if they can't eliminate it. Systems that save the most people, even if they can't save everyone. Systems that work when virtue and good intentions aren't enough. She paused at a flowering tree, something beautiful and fragile that reminded Veshnak of everything she'd fought to protect. Your way is beautiful, Chun said. It values every soul, refuses cruel calculations, insists that systems serve people. We admire that. We want to learn from it. But when the universe forces terrible choices anyway, when someone has to do the mathematics and live with the results, you need humans. You need a species that learned through blood and horror that, sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is build a system cold enough to make the choices that warm hearts cannot. They stood together in the garden. An emphatic who felt everything, and a human who felt too much but acted anyway. Behind them, the machinery of the confluence hummed with renewed purpose. Billions of lives returning to normal, saved by a plan that horrified them and mathematics that worked when virtue wasn't enough. And somewhere in the archives, the Council filed away a new designation for humanity, the Shield species. The ones called upon when systems must matter more than souls. When someone must do the terrible calculus that saves lives through sacrifice. Humanity accepted the role, as they accepted all their systems, with the cold comfort that came from knowing that this time, the cruelty served a purpose beyond itself. This time, the numbers meant something. This time, 8 million lost had saved 12 billion. And the mathematics, terrible as it was, had been worth it. In the end. That was all any system could promise. Not perfection, not happiness, not even justice. Just the cold assurance that when the universe demanded sacrifice, someone would do the math, make the choice, and live with the weight of numbers that used to be names.